Over 550 years ago, during a period of 116 years, a series of skirmishes took place between England and France. Many wars have taken place since, so why are we still dwelling on the Hundred Years' War? During the Hundred Years' War, the nations of France and England were both establishing themselves as nations and world powers. If you consider the previous history of these two countries, you can see that now both are slowly evolving in their sense of national identity. France and Britain used to be united under one culture, Celtic. Further back in history, they were connected by a land bridge between Calais and Dover, and it is undeniable that humans would have traveled to Britain through France or vice versa. The two countries' proximity makes them intrinsically linked, and the majority of Brits living in central and southern England today share around 40% of their DNA with the French. Before the rise of the Romans, the French and English Celts traded, shared culture, and even may have spoken the same language. This connection can be evidenced in the distinct similarities between the Celtic languages of Welsh, Cornish, and Breton, all still spoken today. This commonality all changed when the Romans started to expand their empire. Many Celts were killed, and as Rome began to spread their way of life, the remaining native communities of France and Britain were absorbed into the Roman Republic and Empire. When the Roman Empire fell, both countries' language, religion, and culture changed dramatically. The fall of Rome left a power vacuum, one filled by Germanic invaders. This conquest led to the Anglo-Saxon era in Britain and an influx of Franks and Visigoths in France. While Britain shunned the Roman culture, Gaul, modern-day France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany on the west bank of the Rhine, and Italy's Po Valley remained more Romanized, as were many of the Germanic tribes there. The most significant indicator of this is the root languages of both countries, which is Latin for French and Germanic for English. Soon another set of invaders, the Vikings, would strike, settling in parts of France and England. The populations of the fractured countries were steadily growing, and larger communities formed and allied with their immediate neighbors. England had 7 kingdoms that were slowly uniting, and France was also becoming one kingdom, although the king presided over several duchies, which had their own power and rulers. You're probably wondering, what has all this got to do with the 100 Years' War? Well, the scene is now set for the catalyst of the war to become apparent. 271 years before the start of the 100 Years' War, a Norman, descended from the Norsemen who settled in France, invaded England. William the Conqueror, already the Duke of Normandy, became King of England in 1066. This move, among others, would help tie the bloodlines of the English and French kings in the years to come, and set about the English claim to the French throne. The Norman invasion of England changed the country once again. The language, which had become Germanic after Roman Latin fell out of use, incorporated many French words. In fact, the first king of England to speak English as their first language was Henry IV, who ruled 62 years after the commencement of the Hundred Years' War in 1337. Since the Norman invasion, the English kings had ruled parts of France, and Henry II, who ruled from 1154 to 1189, ruled over an area that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. This empire included regions owned by his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who had been previously married to Louis VII of France. The Angevin Empire included Normandy, Brittany, Maine, Aquitaine, Anjou, Touraine, Toulouse, and Gascony. The French kings steadily regained these territories over a long period of conflict, which was a precursor to the Hundred Years' War. This struggle ended in 1259 with Henry III giving up the majority of the French lands, but retaining a reduced vestige of Aquitaine and Gascony, called the Duchy of Guyenne, with the proviso that homage be paid to the French kings. Relations between the two countries remained tense, with Edward III of England asserting a claim to the French throne as the nephew of the deceased French king Charles IV. France ultimately crowned Philip VI, who allied with Scotland against England, much to the chagrin of Edward. Philip confiscated Guyenne from Edward in May 1337, and by October, Edward had sent a formal challenge to Philip, declaring that France was rightfully his. Many noble families in France were related to those in England, and Edward won some French support through these ties. Rival French nobles also used the conflict to gain support for individual causes, such as Charles of Blois and John Montfort, who both claimed the succession of Brittany. Ultimately, After 5 generations of kings, the war ended, and the lands in France were ruled by France alone, except Calais, which remained the last vestige of English control in France for just over 100 years after the war ended. Despite their defeat, the English kings ostentatiously held on to the title of King of England and France until 1801, when they finally dropped their claim to the French throne. For the lower echelons of society, the war had brought hardship. Trade had slumped due to the disruption in the trade network. Wool could no longer be exported from England, and the wine industry that was a major part of Gascony crashed completely. Any livelihoods dependent on the English Channel suffered from the ongoing conflict. Merchants were at the mercy of pirates. The army commandeered fishing boats, and Southampton suffered from raids by France. The economic hardship was worsened by the continual taxes levied on the citizens to pay for the war destroying their livelihoods. All this was compounded by the Black Plague that ravaged the nations during the mid-1300s. It wasn't any wonder that the common people of England and France started to question the authority of the ruling classes. Trade had been badly affected, and the costs of war were primarily funded by increased taxation. In 1358, the peasants in northeastern France revolted against the nobles. 1381 saw the first peasants' revolt in England. These uprisings led to innovations in the forms of tax collecting. The poll tax was abolished in England and was not collected again until the late 1980s. For the general population in France, the situation was much worse than for their English counterparts. Armies and mercenaries marched across the country, and in places where battles were fought, towns and villages were ravaged and plundered. Edward III had encouraged English soldiers to terrorize the locals by burning crops, stealing cattle, and looting whatever they could. The civil war that broke out between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians only added to their woes. It wasn't just the peasants undermining the English royals back in England. The local barons had been accumulating power and riches while the monarchs were spending all their money on the lengthy and costly war. The barons found themselves in a position where the monarchy needed their approval to make certain decisions. To increase taxes, the king needed the support of Parliament, made up by the wealthy barons, which had been established in 1215 when King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta. During the 100 Years' War, the king often needed money for campaigns, and so Parliament met more frequently, causing it to become a recognized part of English politics. The fact that Parliament held any power at all meant that the absolute power of the monarch was waning, and in 1688, England became a constitutional monarchy. Meanwhile, in France, power was consolidated under the French king. France's success in winning the wars strengthened the monarchy's position, while the power of the nobles was weakened. The French king did not have to consult with anyone before increasing taxes, and tripled the crown's income throughout the war. When the war ended, many of the taxes stayed in place. The salt tax was collected until the French Revolution during the late 18th century. The monarchy kept absolute power until 1791 and became a republic just 1 year later. It could be said that the increased power of the French kings during the 100 Years' War was a major contributing factor to the French Revolution. Both countries thought that God was on their side during the 100 Years' War. After all, the position of king was appointed by God, and therefore was a divine right. The Catholic Church had a complicated role during the war, as both countries felt the Pope should support their cause. The Great Schism that occurred from 1378 until 1417 did not help the matter, as the rival popes exacerbated the cause of the war. Once the conflict was over, the loss of lands in France must have led some in England to question the king's divine right. However, this ultimately worked in their favor. The English monarchs slowly relinquished their power, and in doing so, they managed to avoid the fate of the French royals. After the war, England was virtually bankrupt, and the throne was highly contested. Henry VI was the monarch who presided over the final English loss, making him immensely unpopular with the English nobles. This dissatisfaction with the king resulted in a lengthy civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. The English nobles used their accumulated wealth to raise private armies with which they could extend their influence. The number of English nobles had tripled during the war, as the king wanted to expand his tax base. New ranks were created, and people could qualify for noble status due to property ownership. The gentry of England was no longer restricted to hereditary titles. All of this contributed to the eventual loss of absolute power from the monarchy. Behind the 100 Years' War events, two nations were forging their own identity off the back of centuries of internal division. The ruling classes had used national identity as propaganda during the war, causing the foundation of both countries to be built on mutual animosity. Kings appealed to their soldiers to fight for king and country, and stirring poems and songs were written to develop a feeling of national pride. The French kings were seen as the saviors of France, expelling the evil English from their lands. The historian G. Holmes stated, "The war with England was to some extent the anvil upon which the identity of early modern France was forged." The same could be said for England. Before the war, the English kings spoke French and had brought the Norman language and culture with them. After the war, England became separated from the political affairs of mainland Europe and established an English cultural identity, using the English language in official documentation and court. Nowadays, the deep-seated divide between the French and the English, formed during the 116 years of war, can still be felt. Although the countries allied during both world wars, the relationship between these two nations is one that only comes from a long and tumultuous history. Like squabbling siblings, the English and the French love to hate each other. Luckily for both countries, this manifests as a friendly rivalry, and perhaps some mild contempt, rather than an all-out war. The effects of the war were so far-reaching and played such a large part in the formation of both nationalities that the 100 Years' War is still highly significant today. To learn more about the 100 Years' War, check out our book, The 100 Years' War, a captivating guide to the conflicts between the English House of Plantagenet and the French House of Valois that took place during the Middle Ages. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.